Hello, and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Town and Country Property Auctions London and Fairview International Property Consultancy. Now, each week we look out the stories that are going to get everyone talking, we hope, so we'd love you to get involved in the conversation by placing your comments in the comments section below today's video, wherever you're watching us. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you get notifications of when we go live with Property Matters. Our email address, propertymatterstv@gmail.com, should you wish to get in touch with us. And of course, don't forget to like the page and subscribe with us too. Joining us as always is our property expert, Joe Joshi. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning. Another week of events of property, of course, being the best investment you could ever make. It's always in the news for some reason or another. And that's why we are here once every week to make sure that we do the right thing by our customers.
Well, we were talking about mortgages last week, of course, with Bob and our mortgage special. We start off moving over to the rental market, which is seeing a very similar growth that there's been seen in the sales market. So the average rent in the UK has hit another record high of £1,053. That's up 6.9% on the same time last year, and an increase of 2.3% from the previous month's figure. This is according to Home Let Rental Index. The latest data even shows signs of recovery in London, which sees another price rise after a year of decline, with the annual variance increase of 3.6%. So the average rent now in London, Joe, £1,713 per calendar month. The rise of 4.1% is steeper than any other area of the country. So London's back on the march. And excluding London, the average UK rent now is £892 per calendar month, which is up 8% year on year. So that's got to be good news for those hard-pressed landlords.
Well, they've had a bit of a challenge, haven't they? Especially in the last 18 months through the pandemic. Sometimes we're not able to move people on, and also tenants not being able to move out because of the pandemic and the restrictions that were there. And so the letting market has been on a sort of a low level, but we always knew that there would be a bounce back. We also knew that as time goes on, you will see that the investor part of it is always striking. More and more people, whilst there's a section of people, Paul, that come out of the buy-to-let market, primarily due to maybe taxation commitment or age or retirement or other reason, there is a continuing flow of new investors who will continue to buy in the property market. And when you see the rents rising and the rents return on investment like we are now beginning to see, you'll see that market will never really shrug away. Pundits have said time and time again that the housing market will fall in this case, or the letting market is going to suffer because of the extra taxation and the government commitments and all the legislation that coming. But the reality of it is, Paul, that it's still the safest form of investment, and people still prefer to buy a property that they can rent out or do out and rent out, and all over the country, and especially, London is on the recovery, which is not a surprise at all. And the only reason it's been slightly stayed back is because the international market has not been able to come to London. But as the planes start to fly over Heathrow a bit more, you'll start to see that more and more people are beginning to come back into the UK, and more people consider renting in the UK. Equally, the rental market in other parts of the country have probably shot up because people have been buying left, right, and centre through stamp duty, and of course, even up to £250,000 as far as September is concerned, in other parts of the country, to the northern parts of the country, where they get more value for money, but they're still buying those properties because they can rent them out.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because despite the pandemic, the rental market has been quite resilient. We haven't seen a collapse in the rental market, and typically this time of year you'd expect to see the rents rising alongside inflation, but they've been well ahead of inflation. And if you look actually at Wales, for example, which is the highest year-on-year rise, the rents there are up 12.8%, almost 13%. Up to 723 per calendar month. So really, it is a case of the rents far outperforming inflation. And they suggest that part of this is the same reason that prices have been, because there's so little stock that people actually want, that the rental properties that are the ones people want, the 3 bedroom, the ones with the garden, etc., they're actually, there's so much interest in them that landlords are feeling that they can raise their prices.
Yeah, I mean, it's supply and demand every time, isn't it? Whether it's rentals or sales. If the demand is there, which obviously it is now in the rental market, and part of that is because those people that are renting are not in a position to buy, or haven't got the finance, or their circumstances are such, or their job. But that race for space is taking everybody out to Wales. You gotta let a lot more in the valleys, as they say, for your money. And so you can I can see Tom Jones, blurting out the tones out there, and everybody's going to be going into the valleys to rent, because you're getting a whole house for the money, and that race for space is taking them right out there. So that's created that generation. But I think. Not surprising at all, where you see those, but it's really down to supply and demand, Paul. It always is going to be down to that.
Well, Tom did sing about the green, green grass of home, so obviously he managed to find a property with a garden. They did say that actually there's a little bit of whilst the yields have been really strong, and of course the capital appreciation has been great over the years, so landlords have had that wonderful double whammy there. But they do say, there is one area that we've just got to go through, or tricky negotiation period, which would be the 2 million people coming off of furlough at the end of September, and we'll come on to that more specifically later. But they expect to see a few more claims on rent protection products, which I suppose would be inevitable.
I think with rent protection products, it's that typical insurance. The more landlords have, the bigger portfolio they have, the more they've got a chance of exposure. So the rent products that guarantee them rental whilst the properties become vacant, or someone has become unemployed, or the right levels of claim can happen. Yes, those products are going to become more and more. There are so many other products now being launched. For example, there are deposit protection products where basically you don't actually have to find the actual deposit, whereas originally you used to have to find 1 month or 6 weeks worth of deposit and then the first month's rent. There are schemes now where if someone's credit facility is good enough, they can actually take out an insurance to protect themselves against the deposit. So yes, all these kind of products will continue, and they will continue to come out fresh and new each time, because that market is flourishing, and landlords are always looking at how they can best protect their void periods, because that's the fundamental part of this letting business. You could have a property, and for the sake of maybe a 20-30 pound a month policy, you could avoid a void period, might be for 2 months, where your rental might be for £1,000. So theoretically, that's £2,000 that is not coming in. Okay, it's not 2,000 net, because obviously you're going to take out the cost, but irrespectively, you've still got a hole in that calendar month. And not often, because at the moment, I mean, a couple of my clients have been looking around and seeing what they can do and where they can get, and things that are nice, if they're well presented, come and go very, very quickly. The only things that tend to hang around, unfortunately, are the ones where landlords don't bother to take the effort to refurbish them and present them in a nicer manner. And tenants are just as choosy as we are as home buyers. You want to live in a nice area. You want to live with the property that you feel comfortable. You want to park your nice car outside a drive or on a road that is safe. Not somewhere where you think, well, actually the chances of my wheels not coming back are going to be very dangerous. So all of those things matter a great deal in how it is, and part of that is always been, as part of my personal tips, is always to make sure the exterior and the area that you live in is well presented, because that's how people make the decision.
We've talked a lot, Joe, about stock and the shortage of stock over the last few months, and nobody's really addressed the issue of when will stocks start to return to normal again, or to the levels that we would have expected pre-pandemic. And Gronya Gilmore, who is the lady who does all the research for Zoopla, so we look at her work very often, as you know, once a month when the reports come out on property matters. And she's given some time this month in Property Industry Eye talking about what she thinks are the factors that have caused it and when she thinks it's going to get back to normal, which is quite interesting. So, and some of this is taken from the report that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. So already established that prices are up 6% on the year, and in the teeth of a pandemic, that's been pretty good, and largely been due to the imbalance of higher levels of buyer demand and more limited supply of homes, which we know. So what has been the situation? Well, if you look, number of homes being listed for sale in 2021 is down 5% on what we would say is typical levels. And even if the flow of new homes being listed for sale was back at usual levels, this wouldn't have been enough to replenish the total stock of homes for sale, which is actually down 26% compared to last year. So if we look back at further comparisons, back further, to check against more normal market conditions, so if we look back at, say, pre-pandemic, total stock down 25% compared to 2016 and 2017, and 33% compared to 18 and 19. So basically what they're saying is that stock levels are running at levels that you'd normally see during the holiday period and the Christmas period. So that's the kind of level. And most estate agents, well, the average number of homes on the estate agents' books at the moment is 16, which again is a figure that's not been seen for many years. But they say there are several factors involved. Obviously, we've had, compared to 2019, HMRC data saying that sales jumped 25%. So there's been a lot more sales happening. 1 in 20 homes now selling instead of 1 in 25 as it was in 2019. And the two reasons that they say that this is happening for is because of the first-time buyers. They're up 30%, so they're up a third in terms of the interest from first-time buyers, obviously because of the fact they've got some cheap mortgage products and the prices are mortgage costs are very low, and also the investors. These are the people obviously that have bought rental properties because they've benefited from the stamp duty holiday. So these two, plus the lack of stock, and also of course no new builds happening last year, they're down 11%. So it's a perfect storm of shortage and over demand.
Yes, I mean, and the combination really on that, Paul, is that what we have to sort of take back for a minute is everything came at once. So, you know, the stock numbers are low because the time that was given for the stamp duty holiday actually focused everyone's Christmases, if you want to call it, into one shot. So, you know, the supply of property was limited. We were restricted through pandemic, what we could view, what we couldn't view, what somebody could put on the market. Circumstances were beyond people's own control, whether they were in a position to put something on the market or have it vacated because the tenant was in to do that. So whatever small amount of stock that was left there was then suckered up, and it was just sort of gobbled up by the fact that all these people decided that I'm going to take the benefit of the stamp duty holiday. So that stock just became, you know, exhausted completely. So May, June, July, May, June, up to the end of June, and of course now currently till the end of September, all of that stock that was potentially available and it was in good shape, good order, and in areas that were popular and desirable, hence the prices going up, hence the shortage of it. Yes, normally it's spread out. So our annual cycle, if you want to say, of supply and demand is been completely washed out by the simple thing that we were all rushed into one spot. So everybody moved. So you imagine that picture that we've tried to conjure up in our head, you know, around the M25 on the 30th of June, every man was just a white man van and a removal van, because basically everyone was moving on that particular day. That was a target. Well, those people have moved and settled in, or settling in, and no one's really thought about saying, well, actually, I'm now going to put my house on the market. So we are a little bit behind in that sense, and that will come probably sometime latter part of next year when things start to settle down, and then the stocks will start to revive. But in the meantime, The stocks are low. There's no doubt about it. People are cautious about what they need to do, but that's not because they're cautious because they're worried. They're cautious because there just isn't anything else to do. I mean, if the right thing doesn't come on the market, you're not going to move. If the right
Mm.
property doesn't come on the market to rent, you're not going to move. So it's just kind of a stalemate, really, in that sense. But it's only happened because everything was chucked into one section, and that
Mm.
was
Mm.
stamp duty rush. The government said we want to have a generation of buyers and not a generation of renters, and everyone just jumped on the bandwagon and said we want to buy. And of course, as you rightly say, mortgage products were good, and and therefore people thought, well, actually, why don't I try and buy? Because if I'm going to be spending X, Y, Z every month on rent, I may as well put that towards something that I've actually got as my own thing. There's two gains in that. One is a lower mortgage interest rate, and the second is that whilst they were still buying, sorry, there's three gains in that. Whilst they're still buying, they had the benefit of the stamp duty, and then on top of that, the actual capital value of the property went up while they were still in the process. So from the time of making an offer to the time of completion, not only were they saving the money of the stamp duty, reduced mortgage rates, but also the value of the home that we're buying has actually shot up.
Yeah.
So why not? Everybody would do that.
Yeah. I mean, if you look, the first time buyers, of course, the demand is up 15%, and the investors, all of those, they're up 21%. And all of that extra interest is what they call net new demand. So, in other words, they don't have a property to sell in most cases
Yep.
because they're an investor or they're a first time buyer. So, of course, you've got all this extra demand, but they're not bringing anything to the market either. So, that actually exacerbates the situation, doesn't it?
Well, like Bob said last week, he said that basically when they do let to buy, we talked briefly about let to buy, that people have got a house that they go and they think, okay, well, I'll take the equity out of this one and I'll move to another one and I'll rent this property out. So theoretically, that was exhausting stock. They weren't selling anything, but they were going out and buying the next one. And that's happened a lot for investors because, again, the return on their money sitting in their banks and building societies has made them say, well, actually, it's not bringing me anything here. I may as well go and buy something else. And that whole market has shrunk. Whereas people like the first time buyers, irrespective of all the energy we put into trying to get first time buyers on the first run of the ladder, has actually been slow because the stock has been gobbled up by investors because they know that they could probably rent out and they're
Mm.
getting the returns. And our subject today earlier on showed that how rent prices have gone up. And of course, why wouldn't investors want to do that? And that is a chicken and egg situation, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
comes first? You've got to have the investment to actually get the return.
Yeah, I mean, Grenier says that basically the search for space has further to run, which we discussed the other week, as people are now finding out what their requirements are going to be with work. But the trouble is, they're going to go to the market, going to see there's no family homes available, and that's going to that's going to put the brakes on. And whilst they'll see a strong start to 2022, a lot of optimism around that, they suggest. But by the middle of the year, the end of the first half of the year, they believe that when people see the amount of stamp duty they're going to have to pay, and also first-time buyers don't have the incentives that they would have had during the stamp duty holiday, etc., that this will actually make the market slow down and also slowly repair the stock levels as things become a bit more normal. So they're basically saying that we're going to be short of stock till probably the middle of 2022, and as the demand wanes and the value isn't there, or the perceived value isn't there anymore, perhaps we'll see that things will gradually return to normal. So I think we've got to live this out for probably another year, really, Joe, just under.
Yeah, no, this is what I said. It'll be probably about middle to next end of next year when we start to see the stocks kind of replenishing. Also, circumstances will change, and obviously there are other matters looming, things like furloughs coming to the end and so forth. So those things will start to make some of the changes, and maybe those people will start to think, well, actually, And I'm speaking to some people now, and the people are saying to me, it's been quite nice having the furlough and working from home and so forth. And to be honest with you, I don't really fancy sitting in the traffic going in and going into London. It quite, got used to this new way of life, and that may encourage people to think, well, actually, as I've come to the end of my furlough, and maybe I will sell up, and that stock may come to the market, and they may move further out, and so forth. So there's all sorts of things that will start to rejuvenate the market for stock. Not that the market is suffering for anything else.
While we're on the subject of stock, Joe, let's just have a look at where the hotspots around the country are. This is where, if you're sitting on a 3 or 4 bedroom house with a garden, you're going to be enjoying this particular feature that we've got for you here, because new data from Rightmove reveals a new supply shortage, or the new supply shortage hotspots around the country. So the rankings are calculated based on the biggest changes in the number of homes being marked sold subject to contract and the number of new sellers putting their homes up for sale compared to July last year. So let's just have a look at those areas. So top of the list, Joe, is Newmarket in Suffolk. There's been a 49% drop in new sellers versus July 2020, and a 79% rise in numbers of sales agreed. And therefore, the average price has shot up from 294,656 in 2019 to 320 in July 2021, which is 9% across the 2-year period. So that's not a bad return on investment at today's rates, is it? And in there also look Berkhamsted, Witney, High Wycombe, St Ives, Cambridgeshire, Weybridge, Bushey, Egham, Marlow, Buckinghamshire, and Farnborough even in Hampshire. So from 3 to 9%, but some quite daunting figures there in terms of drop in new sellers versus sales agreed.
Yes and no, because all of those areas we talk about are places where schooling is good, race for space is a nice part of the world. St Ives in Cambridgeshire, and of course Newmarket in Suffolk, and all those areas that you've got literally listed there are all desirable locations, where people would like to go and live, and subsequently that's where the race for space is actually gone. Communication is pretty good for pretty much all of those locations that you mentioned. Education, schooling wise, is also good for that. So all of those are driving factors, Paul, for people to move to those specific types of locations. And of course, supply becomes limited of the property because everybody wants to go there. Schooling is a huge driver for parents to decide where they want to take them. Some of those areas, I mean, for example, High Wycombe, boasts 3, if not 4, possibly of the best grammar schools in the country. So that alone drives people. I've known people to just go and even rent or buy somewhere around there, put their kids through education because it works out better. So that is constantly an area that is going to do well. So I think those are driven by other factors that are important in our personal lives. That says, this is something I need to do because either my child is going to go to a school, or it's communication, or the race for space, and potentially the internet is probably pretty good in those places. Of course, but as you know, I've actually refrained from bringing the internet in for some time now, but I just thought I'd bring that back in and say to you that the speed of the internet has probably got some relevance, because that's where they've all gone. That's the race for space, working from home.
They're saying here that around 2/3 of properties on Rightmove have already found a buyer. So basically, they're already sold subject to contract. But in hotter areas like Newmarket, they're saying that the rate is more like 3/4 are already SSTC. So if we think back to July last year, the market in England had been open for around 6 weeks. The stamp duty holiday was announced and the summer frenzy was just beginning. Some 12 months on the combination of the fewer sellers coming to the market and sustained demand has resulted in summer seller shortfall. Is now another buzz phrase for us, the summer seller shortfall. And so the challenge for agents now is to try and replenish the stock to meet the buyer's demand, which is so 16 properties on the 29th of July. The average was 16 on the books of each estate agent, and if 2/3 of those are already SSTC, then you can see the challenge in terms of
Well,
trying
I
to
mean,
find
house
somewhere to live.
prices are just going to be pushed further up, aren't they? Because agents will take on the basis that, I mean, look at the charts and the growth in a year of a property. What are we looking at? It was 294. Did you see that? And then
Yeah,
300,000, 320.
yeah.
15, 20,000 pounds in an increase on the value on your investment. You've had a saving of probably £10,000 on stamp duty, and you've got a low reduced rate. I mean, what's not to like about the fact that that's a good deal for everybody? And now that there is shortage, it continues. So those that were saying that the property market is going to fall off the edge were far wrong from what it's actually doing. What is the biggest problem is the stock. And as long as the problem comes with the stock, then the problem will come with the supply. And so house prices will continue to rise over the next several years, I would think. It's something drastic. I mean, I think the idea of putting up your national insurance and potentially maybe the Bank of England putting up the interest rate may put a slight brake on the market, but it's still not enough, not in my mind, for people to say, I'm not going to buy, because the ultimate dream is always to have your own place.
Mm.
I can see that. I think that would the way it would work.
Yeah. I think we've probably analysed the marketplace to death. So let's move on to something that I still find it amazing that we're even talking about this in this modern day age. I mean, we flew a man to the moon in 1969, supposedly, and here we are talking about technology that's even older than that, I think. Conveyancers often blame councils for delays in property transactions, and now a comparison site has named and shamed the councils taking the longest to respond to local searches. So this is Compare My Move, which have analysed the speed of local council search operations. And well done to Plymouth City Council, as you can see there. They take the longest time to complete a local land search, with the local authority taking over 36 days on average to do the land search. So here is the name and shame top 10. And Plymouth is at the top there. They have 925 local land searches sent to them each month, and they take 36 days, so a month and a week pretty much to do that. You've got Lewes at 35, Wiltshire in the 30s, Salford, Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council in the 20s, Greenwich, Tameside, Gwynedd, Derby and Tewkesbury all on the name and shame list there. I mean, if we just put that into some kind of comparison with the other end of the list, which isn't shown here, but if you look at some of the councils that do so if you like, Dartford Council receives 1,500 requests a month on average, but they maintain a 24-hour turnaround, so they can do it in a day, and they've got nearly twice as many as Plymouth. It just defies belief that the same service around the country can be so variable. And why does it take so long in this digital age?
Well, this is a huge frustration on the process of house moving. When you think about, the simplicity of what it could be, it's things like this that create the complexity. The time to actually do a transaction for is nearly 3 months, minimum 3 months, potentially 4 months from the time you buy to the time you actually move in. And that is, exasperated by things like this, when you think that 6 weeks of just waiting for perhaps a local land search, a local search, out of that 3 or 4 months, that's where the time was wasted. Of course, it doesn't stop there, does it? Because the chances are when they do a research, then a question is raised. You've got to go back into the system and raise the question. I beg to believe that somebody might turn around and say it'll be another 6 weeks before you get another answer for that thing. And so the never the twain shall meet. But in this modern day of technology, as you rightly say, what makes you think that these things can't happen overnight. And there are systems, we've seen them ourselves. We can purchase those schemes. Of course, like anything, everything has a price. But the bottom line is there are people available. But obviously, Plymouth is still in the dark ages. It still walks from one part of the building to the other and then puts it in someone's in tray, and then they got to
Mm,
stamp it. And then if they got a day off, they can't do it. The next day, just, I'm just
mm.
imagining one of those old movies where it takes forever to get an answer for a simple question, really.
The average out of interest is 8 days for a local land search, and 60% of the UK's councils beat that figure, and 11 of them do it in a day, and they include North Devon and Cardiff and York, and obviously Dartford we mentioned earlier on. Um, um, and then quite a few councils do it in 48 hours, which is also pretty good, I think. But quite interesting to see the variance between the different councils and the frustration that you must have to go through if you live in one of those boroughs.
It's the frustration of the housing market, Paul. It's just archaic.
Mm,
When you think about the process it takes and how long it takes for everyone to do what they need to do, if it's not one thing, it's another. I mean, again, bringing back Bob into the equation, you can see from last time, it just the time it could take for a mortgage application. The first part, you might get approved very, very quickly. Then we go into this sort of black hole where things happen in the background, and then you come out to the other end, and then the surveyor comes along and says, actually, it's not worth what you're going to pay for it. And boom, you're back to square one. And
mm,
that's the part that, yet over the pandemic period, they found a way to accelerate that by desktop and doing some desktops and so forth. But to a large extent, we're going to go back to that stage where the surveyor's got to walk around with his clipboard and go and do the inspection. And if he's doing that, it means time. So all of those things, conveyancing, local searches, valuations, surveys, replies to inquiries, environmental searches, all the things that now are required to be done are the single reason why it can't. And yet, with the modern technology that we all are doing today and dealing with, you'd think that that is available. If libraries have become defunct because of Google, travel agencies in the high street became defunct because of Google. God knows what else has happened, but I mean, we still haven't managed to sort the housing crisis out in terms of Google. So maybe this is a job for Google to sort of pick up and say, you know what, you can Google your search here in a heartbeat.
yeah, I'm sure there must be a way around it, and I'm sure they'd be the people to do it. Um, let's just have a quick look at. You've always said, Joe, of course, investing in property is a wise move. It never goes down; it always goes up, and therefore, this is a story of particular interest to you, I would suggest, because this is really predicting where house prices will be over the next decade, and they're predicting a 30% increase in house prices over the next decade, delaying first-time buyers by almost 2 years. So because of the houses are going to go up by 30%, that means that you're going to have to save more deposit, and therefore the average age of the first-time buyer is getting older and older. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. This is by comparethemarket.com. They forecast the average age of the first-time buyer will be predicting to reach 37 in London and 35 in the rest of the UK by 2031. And in the next 10 years, it says, based on ONS data, that the average home will jump by 30%, costing £323,718, an increase by 33% in Greater London to 619,000. So there you can see. So they've taken the data from 1992 to 2020, and then they've put that through a forecasting model, and they've come out with the column on the left. You can see Greater London. So currently 465,000 for your average home in London now. That's going to be 619,500 within 10 years. And in the UK overall, excluding London, 248 for now, and then 323 in 10 years' time. So you've had your theory underlined, Mr. Joshi.
Well, there you are. You see, I rest my case, Your Honour. Um, it is undoubtedly the right investment for people to have, and those figures will tell you that going forward, people always say, when's the right time to buy a house, Joe? I'm going to wait for this, I'm going to wait that. My answer has always been simple: when you can afford it, buy it. Now is as good as it's going to be, and this is a prime example of why now is as good as it's going to be. Because if you're looking at the growth that they're predicting in the next decade of what house prices are going to be like, then just imagine what you would miss out on if you didn't. And so it's so important, and that's where people, banks of mum and dad, where they're gonna leave money to their children. This is the time to sort of say to them, you know what, this is where we'll invest. They can invest collectively. They don't have to sort of give it all away. They can invest collectively, but you can't go wrong. And we've talked about supply today. Look at the supply issue. We talked about the demand issue. The demand issue is huge, and now we're talking about what is available. What has happened, which is obviously unprecedented, is the last 18 months of the pandemic has focused everything and everyone and everything is now being done different just in 18 months, Paul.
Mm.
Did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that some of the biggest people, the biggest names that you will hear for in the last 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, are names that you never thought that would happen? Deliveroo, Just
Mm.
Eat, the Amazon. I mean, these are people that have just turned up because of the advantage that they've taken in terms of what happened in our lives, and that's now driven and driving the way we all think about what we're going to do next. Um, they said when they
The
brought the
digital
internet,
disruptors, isn't it?
yeah, they brought them when the internet came into the UK. I remember, the old Commodore or whatever it was that arrived as the first. It's never going to take off. It's never going to take off. Nobody believed it, and today we can't exist without it. So never say never, and I would say the same with houses. Really, not as fantastic and fast as digital, but still creating a great return, a sound investment, and a lovely home at all sort of put together in one place. And that's going to continue. I can't see that changing at all.
Yeah. Well, I remember. I think it was the top man at IBM back in those days. You were talking about where he was predicting that the personal computer would never be such a thing. It would never be a hit, and that we'd all still be on the big mainframes and the like. And look where we are now with more power in our phone than they had in some of those mainframes probably back in those days.
Well, I
Just
think I think about people like Blockbuster. I mean, where did they miss a trick? You
mm,
know, your Netflix now and whatever else, Amazon Prime, where they watch films and so forth. And Blockbuster went into liquidation simply because they said it won't work. Well,
mm.
I think they were wrong. You know,
And
so sometimes,
I was going to say, I'm
sorry,
pretty sure I read recently, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read recently that Blockbuster had an opportunity to invest in Netflix at
they
that
did,
time when it was set up. I think that's
they
right,
did,
or certainly one of those platforms anyway, if it wasn't that one. But they were
yeah,
offered the opportunity to go digital effectively or
and
get
they said
involved
no,
at least. And they said
yeah,
no, which again,
yeah.
another classic error of judgment. But yeah, fascinating. Looking at the average age there, so currently, if you're trying to buy in London, you're going to be 35 for your first purchase, 33 outside of London, and that's going to move to 37 in the next decade inside London, and almost 35 years of age if you're buying your first home outside of London. So. Getting further out of reach with every year, I guess, and I suppose that's nothing new. We've seen that for quite a while, but it, it, it it's such a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, how do you resolve it?
Well, you can't. It's the old adage here: if you can't beat them, you've got to join them. And you're not going to beat them single-handedly. There's no such thing. If I had a penny for every bloke who told me that it was going to go backwards, like I said, I wouldn't be sitting here on a Sunday morning to do this. The reality of it is that it is what people want. Everybody's ultimate dream is to have their own home, and interesting. I think we were going to bring it up on last week's show, but there are other parts of the world
Mm.
that are amazingly shocking in terms of prices. And we come, I think it was about 10th we talked about.
Yeah.
And yet, nevertheless, it's not just the UK wide issue, it's a worldwide issue. This is what people want. The ultimate dream is to own your own home. And that will never change. That will never stop. And as long as we want to own our own homes, or we want to be part of that, all of the other suppliers will be supplying into the home, which is why the home is the most important part within our lives.
I just found the story here, Joe. So I've just forgive me, I'm messing around here, but I've just we didn't actually cover
Something
it last
unusual.
week, but
We're always
but
messing
it,
around.
since you mentioned it, it might be worth having a quick look at it here. So this is it. So Israel has outstripped other nations. I think 345 percent increase in prices over the last 10 years, more than any other
Yeah,
country. And that's the cost of homes per square metre has risen from £1,553 in 2010 to 6,920. A huge increase
unbelievable.
of 5,500 almost in a single decade. This compares to average wage growth of 17.5% over that period, and annual inflation at 0.92%. This analysis from money.co.uk. We were 10th on the list. Yes, the UK has seen the 10th biggest house price increase in the past decade, with the average property price per square metre increasing by three quarters, from £2,469 to £4,318, whilst wages only rose by 0.6% and inflation 1.97%. But that's immense, isn't it? 345% increase in 10 years in Israel.
Colossal, colossal. I mean, if you had the hindsight, you'd say, "Oh, I should have put my money in Israel." But that's we don't know that. But the point I was trying to make, and I'm glad you brought that story there. But the point I was trying to make is that I talk about UK because at the end of the day, that's where my life is and that's what I know. But when I look at these kind of results, it just only endorses all that I try and advise on, is that it is the best investment you'll ever make. And it's not just in the UK. There are pockets, there are places in the world that are outstripping, and here is a prime example that you'd never ever imagine that was going to be even on the list. I remember in my younger days, places like Hong Kong used to be, at the top of the tree because it's so isolated. Obviously, New York, Hong Kong, Sydney, all the main places in the world would do it. But and even things like Canada will probably do it. But some of these places that we've seen highlighted here were definitely not even on the list, but quietly have climbed to the top. And it goes back to the same thing: is that we never thought, Just Eat and Deliveroo will be the place to go to, or Uber, or whatever those other scenarios
Mm.
are. But if you don't look carefully, they do slip in, and all of a sudden they become very much the fabric of our life.
Final story of the week, Joe. The end of the furlough scheme, of course, is the next big date in the property diary, shall we, if we want to call it that, perhaps. At the end of September, of course, does it pose a risk to housing? The question being asked on Property Industry Eye this week. So the scheme finishes on the 30th. Obviously, this is where the government pays 80% of employees' wages. And they don't seem to think that it's going to have too much of an effect on the economy. The reason showing that the latest data at the end of the repossessions ban and mortgage payment holidays haven't seen an upturn in homeowner distress. So obviously the repossessions ban's now gone and mortgage payment holidays stopped, but they haven't seen huge numbers of people getting into distress as a result of that. And also, they mentioned the point that there's been limited damage in the labour market. Basically, there wasn't a big jump in unemployment. So there was 3 million people on the furlough scheme over the period of January to June. And that when that fell down, there was only 700,000 people went on to unemployment. But there currently were there are currently, for example, 953,000 job vacancies from May to July, which is a record high. So it suggests that actually there's been, again, quite a resilient labour market, jobs seem to have been protected. They don't seem to see that there will be a massive fall off at the end of this period of the 30th of September.
So in terms of the furlough market, Paul, I mean, I would say that there is obviously a concern that some of the people may come off the furlough scheme and then plan and choose what they're going to next do. And some of them are going to be driven by the fact that they've had that benefit of furlough, and now can choose to plan and do different things in a different way. I don't think it will affect it because house prices, again, have been shooting up. So the number of people that were in arrears anticipated at the beginning, when they thought, well, actually, people are now going to lose jobs, so we're going to have a huge number of people that are going to be behind on their mortgage payments and so forth, and therefore the repossession market may absolutely go gaga. Hasn't actually happened that way because it's not been in their interest to make it happen. And even landlords that were not getting their rent in time from them obviously realized that the capital value of their property that they were looking to repossess has gone up. So they stumped up and sort of supported the mortgage and rental side of it because they know that ultimately they will get that back at the end of the furlough. There will be a bit of a lull, definitely. There's no question about it. There's going to be a bit of a pause and a stop in everybody's mind as to what's going to happen out of the furlough, and then that furlough end up will come racing past the C word, which is going to be around the corner. People are already counting on the C word and being, and that then normally is when all of the bad news comes out. So Christmas comes along, and companies start to tell you the number of people they're going to lay off, and people go home for Christmas and never return back to work because of circumstances that have changed. And I think the furlough benefit or the furlough problem will come to light more around Christmas, I think, than it does before.
They're saying that the bit I was trying to find, they're saying that the number of people that are in mortgage payment problems is actually falling, but the number of people who are in serious problems is actually rising. So those that were in problems earlier on are they're not getting any better, but the number of people that are falling into difficulty for the first time is actually falling, which is pleasing to see, I guess, in some way.
The commercial people are the ones that are probably falling into bigger problems, Paul, than they are on the residential. And I need to find that in the sense that all of those shops and businesses that had to shut down and the rents and the rates that didn't get paid. And then you look at some of the bigger operators who had to sort of close down and staff-wise and so forth. Whereas the average person's mortgage payments have not risen. The value has gone up, and it's in their interest because the capital value of their property has gone up as well. So that's given them the feel-good factor of saying, well, one of my phrases, people gauge the value, their worth by the value of their home. Tells them that if the house prices are going up, at least they are feeling wealthier in the sense that there's some equity there, and they could fall back on that. Whereas the commercial side of the world is probably having a slightly different situation where landlords are not getting the rents because the big companies are not operating, the shops are stopped to close. And that's probably, I think there's more of that to come, Paul. I think come the furlough, that's where our issues will come, and that will have a snowball effect.
Yeah, they're saying that the UK Finance Trade Body is saying in their Q2 review that they're saying that they'll see unemployment peak at around 5.4% in the final quarter of 2021. So yeah, pretty much what you're saying there. They'll see that then, and that will be the worst that it will get to. But the only other fly in the ointment, of course, for many will be, of course, if there's an interest rate rise, because then those mortgage payments become even more difficult to meet.
And I anticipate a mortgage rate rise. I think that in the first quarter, maybe in the first half of next year, we will see, a smidgen of an interest rate rise, primarily because it's probably overdue, and secondly, it's the only way they'll put a bit of a brake on what is happening to the property market. Because whilst they made it run away, equally they've got to put a brake on it now, because otherwise it will be beyond control for them, and then you'll have you know, the old story: the higher the lower, the bigger the fall situation. What we don't want to have is get to such a stage that we actually end up having some level of a crash, which I can't see, because you know everybody will protect their home vigorously, and we haven't got to that stage. But one time in my life cycle, you know, how interest rates went up to 18% and people were just chucking keys back up because it was unviable. I don't think we'll ever get there, but you know, nothing to say that some of that might not happen if you're overstretched. And so you got to be careful. But I think interest rate rises will come, just as you know they've broken their pledge or their manifesto about saying they wouldn't put any taxes up and so forth. And they're going to put. Where are they going to find the money from? They have no choice. You know, nobody. People say, "Oh yeah, they've broken the manifesto. They're doing this," but the reality of it is very simple. Nobody knew we were about to go into a pandemic when they got elected. That wasn't on the cards. There might have been whispers of it, but nobody's expecting it to be this way. So whatever you pledged at the time was based on history of other things, not because you come into a car crash. We came into a car crash, and all of a sudden, so you know there are going to be changes. They are going to make the changes. They are going to have to sort of turn the other cheek and say, well, I know we said this, but we're now going to do this. And so I expect interest rates higher, probably some sort of taxation, the 5% that they reduced on VAT to the hospitality will probably go back to 20% before you know. So all of those things will start to regenerate the income that they need.
Well, Joe, time has beaten us once again. Thank you, as always, for your insight and wisdom on all matters property, as we do every Sunday morning here on Property Matters. And we'll be back, of course, next Sunday at 10 o'clock, same time, same place.